Hello, everybody. Kyle here. Welcome back to the Stellaris Emergency Broadcast Podcast. I'm joined here by my co-host, Stark. Stark, how you doing today?
Pretty good.
Glad to hear it. We're going to be recapping Dev Post 206 today, directing Nemesis. I should say these are the Dev Diaries you can find up on the Paradox Forum. And of course, you can find them in the podcast show notes or up on the Revelator website, revelatornetwork.com. We got a whole big Stellaris page. I'm going to be working on that, building that out. And as this show grows, thanks to all of you amazing listeners that are out there engaging, we've already got some people trying to join up on the Gilded server we have. Let me talk about that in a second. But I wanted to say if there's people out there that are really, really interested in helping the Stellaris Emergency Broadcast go, we've got some contact forms up on the website. There's a whole volunteer program if you want to get involved with helping these podcasts succeed and grow and scale and scope. One thing I could absolutely, Stark and I could always use help with is input on ideas. We have a massive list we've been starting on that's covering concepts from large scale systems down to the really fun minor Easter eggs that exist in the game, because there's a lot of them. Stark was just telling me, which one were you just talking about, Stark?
You were talking about 40K. Oh, no, we were talking about the Blorg.
The Blorg, that's it. We're going to be covering them a little bit more in this episode, because they're going to be coming up in relation. But you go, what? You're like, Kyle, do you know what the Blorg is? I'm like, no, I think I've heard of them. We went on the Wikipedia. They've got a whole big thing. We can talk about Easter eggs from Stellaris all night long. And I think we should, because I play around a lot of these systems, knowing of them in concept or name only. I'd like to dive way deeper, see how maybe we can play out different avenues when it's a quest choice, or, just make people generally aware of the things they might be sleeping on,
Yep. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's buried in here. Really,
really, truly. So in this post today, this one is all about the design direction. And this, Stark, who did you say was behind this post?
This is Daniel Morgard. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is the game director now, I believe.
This was a good one. I really like this post, mainly because it touched on a lot of the stuff you and I have been discussing throughout the just last couple episodes, especially in the larger thematic conversations we've had. So picking up the concept of box concept. The concept of box concept.
Box concept.
Do you want to give us a little bit of an outline on this one? Because I think this is important when we're starting to understand direction for expansions. And I liked how this one got set up.
Yeah, and this is sort of, it makes sense in a simple concept of its themes. You get a developer looking at they want a theme for their expansion. And Morgard's describing this in the concept of having a box for specific themes and then building everything around that. So the examples he gave specifically were Utopia was about internal politics and customization, Apocalypse was about warfare, Megacorp was about economy, and the Federations was about diplomacy. And then he also points out that Nemesis is, again, it's primarily a diplomacy-focused expansion, which really starts to explain something that was kind of, we've both mentioned it publicly, and it's been a little bit strange kicking around, where it's this feels like a follow-up to Federation.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that's because it's another aspect to diplomacy. So I think until I read this and actually gone through it and was thinking about it, I was like, oh, now it all makes sense. Because Federation is sort of you're unifying together for a common cause and to create a better world. And then Nemesis is more you're either becoming the thing that eats the galaxy, or you're unifying together in the face of a common threat. So there's a very distinct difference, but when you're working within this theme concept, it's oh, I understand why these two look so similar.
That is very well said. Yes, we pointed out how, in a way, Federations felt like the version 1, and this is kind of putting the finesse on top of it. It's really finalizing a lot of the systems that were good but weren't great. And I gotta say, from all the billboarding we're seeing, from all the advertising and the conversations, the Paradox Insider event, they're really selling me on this. We've talked before. He called me Kyle Palpatine offline today, everyone. I didn't comment at the time, so this is the first time but I noticed that Kyle Palpatine. I didn't say a word because What was I going to rebut about that?
I'm not wrong.
You weren't wrong. Now that that's been brought out into the light, so everyone, this one, I'm just absolutely a fan. And I love getting the insight from them. So going a little bit more point by point, you called out some of these, but just to recap them, yeah, Apocalypse being about warfare makes sense. Megacorp for economies, Federation about diplomacy, Utopia being about internal politics and customization. And I say these all again because we have listeners out there that are really interested in buying the game. Go ahead and rewind that, or go check out the post itself. Go check out the episode where we talk about what you're getting per box or expansion. Really, really key, because these areas expand the game very dramatically when you get them. And in here, we're going to get into espionage, which will be a system that's been relegated to the default 3.0 update. Is that correct, Stark?
Yeah. So yeah, that was something that was confusing us for a little while, where it was like we were looking at that, and for some reason I had it in my head that was going to be a box feature rather than going to be, added to the the play set for everybody. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, wait, that doesn't make any sense, because this is going to massively change the way you approach other empires in the game, just from the beginning of the game forward. So it needs to be there for everybody. Otherwise, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage when the intel system comes in. And I'm folding espionage and intel together there a little bit, but probably shouldn't.
It is.
So yeah, this is going to be everybody. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's very dangerous, and I do apologize on my part for switching the words intel and espionage, because I'm just going to do that forever, I fear. I will try my best to sort it out when I can. There's one thing, though, and I might have moved over this. I don't think I heard you mention it. Before we fully dive into talking about the goals and what things like espionage, what the ideas behind that were. Before we get to that stage, I like this one quote about Federations focus more on good diplomacy, Nemesis focusing more on the evil diplomacy.
Yeah.
That was a good pull quote.
It is. Yeah, and it is a good distinction between the two, like between what we're saying with Federation and what we're saying with Nemesis.
I absolutely agree. I think that looking at what all options you get to go diplomatic-wise here, between becoming the crisis, between becoming the custodian to combat the crisis, or taking that further and becoming the Imperium, it does seem like you have two more traditionally evil or darker authoritarian paths at your disposal in this expansion. Where Federation, very good. It gave the actual Federation ability, and it brought in the galactic community. Didn't really give you a way to go off the deep end. You can make yourself the single counselor for the community, but that's about where your unilateral power ends, I believe.
You got the hegemony path on your Federation setup, but that's mostly just a militarized focused one, isn't it?
You know what? I'm going to pull that up actually while we're talking.
Yeah, because I'm sitting here thinking, like, I know I've looked at it, I know I read it, and then I was like, well, this is neat. I'm never going to use it, and then immediately forgot everything I read. Did that ever happen to you?
Oh, all the time. Every time I make show notes for a podcast, I wing every podcast is completely winged by me, because even if I made the notes 5 minutes ago, they're all gone. So I just glance back and hope I did well. I found the hegemony. There, just quick recap of how Federation types work. We got Galactic Union Trade League. What's this? Material Alliance. And we got the Research Cooperative and the Hegemony. So Hegemony is the members cannot leave the Federation. Wait.
Yeah,
that's a secede casus belli. Yeah, if you leave it, there's a secession casus belli.
Cause war against you. Yeah.
That's that's the only one that does that, for the record. So that's not crazy. I thought that I was reading something that was going to be repeated, but no, that's interesting. Naval contribution cost is reduced by 100%.
Yeah, there's no naval contribution cost for the president.
Wow.
You get an additional envoy. You get additional resources from jobs. You get the established. Okay. So, without looking at it, established hegemony war goal probably means you can forcibly. Okay, so yeah, this is a thing where it's like you've got a military conquering empire, so like a Roman Empire, where you conquer other nations and slurp them in, and they still technically exist as autonomous states, but they serve you. How is it you're not all the time?
Huh? Well, okay. great question. Why am I not that all the time? This is where I beg that if we have anyone listening from Paradox or anyone that has any say that, can get feedback in. I love the hive mind. It's almost exclusively what I play because it truly is what I love. But we have only one Federation type we can join in the actual vanilla game, if you will, the non-modded game. And that is that we can only be in the Galactic Union, which, speaking about vanilla, is basically the most vanilla because that's like a versus crisis stuff. Like it's just more monthly unity, monthly diplomatic weight, like Federation envoy. It's fine, but it doesn't seem to have a strong direction outside of we are the space UN.
Mm-hmm.
No teeth. Now, here's something that's interesting though, Stark, we've learned. If multiplayer friends are inviting you to things, like I can join someone else's research cooperative. So maybe what I need to ask like Space Unicorn to do is start playing a hegemony, rolling one of those up and
passing you leadership.
Yeah, we kind of let it roll. So that's the other thing. We need to do a whole deep dive into federations is what I'm hearing, because there's a lot to talk about between all of the different options in the menus. There are mods that make the Federation types significantly better, and I recommend people do it if that's your take. Just because they can add a lot of flair, even if you only want to play them for one day and throw it away. There's a lot to be said about how you let NPCs join your thing and what the dangers are of them manipulating the system. But I don't want to deviate too far from today's episode. The reason I say all of this is it's all tied in. It's really hard to kind of separate these things and not talk about one versus the other. Because what we're just a minute away from talking about is cognitive load. So maybe this is actually a decent segue. Maybe we tie it in that direction first. This expansion let's
just hop down to cognitive load then.
Yeah, because what we're talking about is the idea that you can, as your game expands, overwhelm players very easily. Because if you're starting with a base game, you can overwhelm people all the time. But if you're starting with a base game that's cohesive and you start adding a chunk, those chunks can get radically overwhelming very quickly, especially to players that are jumping in late in the game, like myself, who jumped in with, like 7 or 8 DLCs that I picked up for Stellaris all in one swoop. So
yeah, I think you joined right before Federation dropped, didn't you?
I want to say post by a month or two. Yeah. It was short timing.
Yeah, it was.
So you're right on the money with that, Stark. This is actually my first DLC, like major expansion for them aside from Nemesis. So yeah, basically point being cognitive load. There's a quote here. Cognitive load is definitely something that is tricky when designing for grand strategy games. I feel like the espionage system has hit a good mark with not being mandatory to play the game, but also being fun and interesting when you want to use it. So there you go, everyone. That's kind of the bridge we're talking about. Is I've been afraid in the last couple episodes, sometimes espionage systems are boring, sometimes they're overwhelming, and we are looking at a game that is spinning out in very fun directions, but a lot of directions.
I think we probably should define this a little bit too. Yeah. So I think we've just sort of skimmed over it. Like the thing about cognitive load, and it's really a mind bender once you realize it exists, is your brain can only process so much information at once. I mean, it's nice to think, oh yeah, I'm here, I see all of these things, but it's like there are actual straight up biological limits to how much information you can process. And if you try to give somebody more information than their brain can handle, which you absolutely can do, they will not be able to process through it properly. They can't parse what they're seeing, they can't understand what they're doing, and they can't really react. And I think we were talking about this, like there's real world applications for this where you can simply overload someone's senses to the point where they don't know what's going on until they can finally, start putting stuff back together. And in game design, especially something like Stellaris, you are managing an entire stellar empire, or at least a model of an entire stellar empire. And yeah, that can get a little overwhelming. So that's what we're talking about with cognitive load. Like there are these limits, and trying not to put too much stuff on the player at once where they just disconnect.
I think yes, 100% what you said, that there's such real world applications to it. You can actually see it more so. Now, you and I have talked about this a little off air since. how we talk about the game in terms of how people can slow it down and speed it up, between multiplayer and all of that as well. As a guy that usually plays multiplayer on fast speed, this 2 out of 3, I am used to making a lot of decisions on the fly. Now, that's another system that could probably use a little bit of help. We've talked about that in the past for the multiplayer extension of it. But you're right, making decisions on behalf of a stellar empire all in a quick succession of time can be very, very overwhelming. And it most definitely impacts how your empire turns out. So that's something to be very cautious of, because if players start falling behind on the build scale, when they fall behind on taking an ethics perk or picking up research in a timely order, that stacks. Really so when you see the big amplifier techs as well, because you can be setting yourself behind by hundreds or thousands. That will add up. AIs will surpass you if we're not already talking about an expert player here. If we're talking to the base player that's jumping in, it matters. And so hearing that the dev team is aware of it and intentionally pruning and making sure what they're adding is concise, really, really key to me, especially when it comes to a growing audience.
Yeah. It's actually also something sort of in passing here. Like you're talking about multiplayer. I do love multiplayer in this game. Right? Like I didn't expect that as much when I was playing, because mostly I started out playing single player. But yeah, in single player, and especially when I learned, I was pausing constantly and processing through stuff and making sure I had all the details worked out. Multiplayer is a completely different animal because it is kind of this fly by the seat of your pants. You just need to make the decisions immediately. And depending on how you are as a player, there's a fairly strong argument to say that you probably want to start with single player and learn the ropes there rather than hopping into multiplayer right off the bat. Because in multiplayer, stuff like the espionage system, but even just stuff like ship design, stuff like research technologies, like I go into a thing with Ascension perks and it's just like, okay, I know what I want to do, so I know which perk to grab. I know which tradition tree to start working my way down. I know which technologies are going to benefit me. And in some cases, I know which technologies to pick in order to try to push my technology in a certain direction. But that's all stuff where it's like, if you're playing multiplayer from the outset and you can't pause and you can't take the time to really dig through all the tooltips, it can screw you. Because it is kind of like going from chess to speed chess. You can't just sit there and actually take the time you need to fully appreciate what's going on in a lot of cases.
See, this is where I'm hearing more so that I'd love to get some volunteers from the audience that would be interested in consolidating ideas, because as you're talking, I'm hearing how do you bring someone into the game? And I've had the experience of bringing a couple players in before. It is right now a mix of me recommending videos on YouTube, single player content, though exclusively talking to, like you have friends available who are willing to like coach you and spend time on this. I think multiplayer can be a very invaluable asset, especially like you coached me, because you watched my game streamed through like Discord and were able to point out what certain UI elements were, because that stuff can be really lacking in here. So you can sometimes pick that up from YouTube videos, but there's also an element to having friends that can help you with that stuff too. And I think altogether it can make something really cohesive. So this is, again, my second attempt here in this one episode to be like, if you're out there listening, if you have ideas, if there's something you want to learn more about for the game that you think we should put into like some little comprehensive guide, we're going to start going into some tutorial space here in the podcast in the future. Just because I know I literally learn something almost new all the time in this game. Literally after 600 hours or more.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So get in touch. Talking to the espionage system then more specifically, let's hone in now that we've defined what cognitive load is and how that can be overburdened. There's a quote here. I wanted information gathering to be a large part of this expansion. Espionage systems are hard to get right because they can feel too predictive or boring, and you also have to constantly be considering the experience of someone who's being targeted by espionage. Yep. Again, very good points. The predictive and boring, I've talked about how I like that before. But the being targeted Stark was not the one that came to my mind immediately. But that feels rough in a game when you're just getting bullied.
Yeah, and so there's an entire narrative, like even if you're sitting there and constructing your entire narrative around espionage, right? Like you've got like mentally, you're telling your story about you're sending spies out and things like that. When you're on the receiving end, that narrative doesn't happen because sort of by design, you don't know it's happening. So it's just suddenly something horrible happens. I think I've mentioned it on air, but it's like I can't remember who said it originally, but it's the situation where it suddenly feels like the computer is cheating against you, where you've got the espionage, an espionage system. I think it was like Civ 2 or something, where it's like you could sabotage cities with your spies, and the AI would use the spies and sabotage your city, and you're just like, well, why is my production suddenly screwed? Why are all of my units dead? And there was no explanation. It was just, oh yeah, no, this happened. And you little pop up that says, oh yeah, a spy did this. And it's like, it feels bad. There's no interaction. There's no, early on when you don't understand how to deal with infiltrated units in that game, there was no way to know this was even coming. So it was like, yeah,
you talk especially about feeling cheaty. I mean, when we start talking amping up the difficulty level though, and the RNG numbers rolling differently, that is pretty cheaty, because I mean, when their rolls are better than yours and they're just like eating stuff like that, yeah, that's a problem in games.
That's also,
as a genre, it's a whole
almost the entire genre of strategy games relies on the AI cheating for higher difficulties, and that's sort of understood. It's like, okay, well, if you're playing at the impossible difficulty, your enemy's production speed is going to be accelerated, their resource production is going to be increased. Maybe they'll have other bonuses. Maybe they'll have more, like they'll have greater vision range or whatever. It varies from game to game, but sort of a problem for strategy games across the board is, in order to make an AI enemy, really overwhelming, you kind of need to just give them straight statistical advantages, because it is in part a numbers game.
I totally agree. I have two really quick spin-off things. I don't want to necessarily break into conversations, but for one, this one maybe for a whole other episode. I would adore if a game like this, not saying it has to be Stellaris, but I'd really like to see, as we move to this digital online social space, and we're all starting, like with the introduction of Valheim and all that, people are starting to find the joy in small servers again between a couple friends, multiplayer. I would love to see strategy games like this kind of add in, beyond the observer mode, but almost a dungeon master sort of mode, where they can kind of hop in and have a little bit of control over the AI and maybe help nudge them, whether it's through unlocking perks through them, like almost like one person gets the cheat menu and they can hot swap between the enemy. Because I know this is very extra and not that many people would take advantage of this, but I've thought about this before and chatted with friends. People would have interest, I myself, but you could really tailor a game for folks.
Yeah, you can. I know that Divinity Original Sin 2 has that. I don't know if the first one does. Like, that's actually an RPG, so like the sort of dungeon master tabletop experience is already baked in, but that one specifically has a dungeon master setup going.
That's cool.
You see that, you see it fairly infrequently with RPGs, particularly ones that are trying to recreate a tabletop experience where you've actually got a dungeon master and then you've got players working with them. I've never gotten into any of those personally, but it's certainly a structure that exists. It's just, you're right, you don't usually see that in strategy games. And it would be interesting to see a strategy game that supported something like that.
Honestly, if there's Stellaris modders out there, that I feel like it'd be very hard to do with just modding tools, because it seems like you'd need something grander. But I don't know. I just love to see any game take a stab at it, because I guess I'm not asking for something too radically different than basically taking a debug cheat menu and giving one person access over that. So, I feel like the tools roughly would exist. I feel like it would need some finessing. But ultimately, I think the payoff could be games that are as memorable as classic D&D, like the stories that people tell and they share with their friends for years and years to come. Just because you're giving it a human element that makes the enemy feel less cheaty. Then, you can see if your one friend is expanding too rapidly, maybe you give their neighbors some more troops to get those borders defended, or whatever that would look like. Take it a little easier on the friend that's newer and doesn't want their teeth kicked in on their first couple gameplays. I think it could really help, but I digress, and I already forgot what my second little point was to make out of this. But yeah, the RNG thing can get really absurd in games. Oh, I know what. I was just going to say really quickly that I do like that Stellaris does actually tell you in the difficulty slider what is getting enhanced when you turn those levels up. So quick shout out for actually disclosing.
Yeah, that's actually something, seeing it more often now in strategy games, but it used to be you would never see that. It was kind of aggravating. So it's like, what's the difference between these difficulties? Oh,
yeah, do I get a negative penalty? Do they get a plus?
Yeah.
Like, what exactly? Because it's a mix. Some games do flip-flop. This one's, I believe, all additive to the bad guys.
Yeah, I believe so. I think this one is all additive. It might apply a penalty on the lowest difficulties to the AI. I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, yes. Sorry. That is well said. I believe you are right. Sorry. I guess I meant, no, you're totally right. That you are correct. I guess I meant the higher you go, you do not get like any sort of negative modifier or anything like that on your.
Yeah, no, the AI gets a positive modifier, higher difficulties.
Good differentiation there.
Yeah.
That's very good. You are listening to the Stellaris Emergency Broadcast podcast. But are you subscribed to Chaos and Shadow? If your love of aliens and all things outer space goes beyond just gaming, make sure to get subscribed. We're on all your favorite podcast players at Chaos and Shadow. It's up on RevelatorNetwork.com. We talk to some very interesting people, talking about time loops, alien cultures, and many more things related to the occult, witchcraft, and beyond. Chaos and Shadow, RevelatorNetwork.com. Become a member. Get bonus content. Okay, back to your stuff. Bye. Let's see. There's one quote here in espionage before we move on in the urgency of time. They said something we also have to consider when adding a new system like that is the player only has so much capacity to interact with existing systems. We need to create a system that is fun and engaging when you choose to use it and be aware that it's quite risky to add new systems the player is forced to interact with. Okay, so kind of recapping that quote, that was going to set up our cognitive load discussion that you can overwhelm a player's senses and ability to process. Now, having talked about that a little bit, there is another conversation embedded here that is the idea of optional systems. What you can ignore, what you cannot ignore, and what is worth the time investment to become familiar with. Because Stellaris, looking at you, you do have quite a few of those systems baked into you currently.
At the same time, I do really like that this is getting put in that category of optional, because Stellaris, I think I originally sold you on the concept where it's kind of like a sci-fi RPG. Like, it looks like a strategy game, but it's actually more of a role-playing game in the sense that you're playing a role in the galaxy rather than just a conventional, okay, I'm going to obliterate all that oppose me. And within that context, they even talk about themselves creating a power fantasy. Espionage is not going to be the center point for every player's interstellar empire fantasy. And so making sure that this is optional I think that's actually a really good decision there, because you can end up with stuff like, we've both played games with espionage where it's like, you cannot afford to ignore it. Like, if you do not spend time dealing with it, you will get screwed over. I think we just did talk about Civilization 2, where it does that. It'll screw you over. And I think the entire sub-series is like that now. Not 100% sure. Probably. But there's a lot of them where it's like, oh yeah, I could just choose not to use espionage. And I'm like, oh wait, I would get screwed so hard. So yeah, it's having that as something that is designed to operate in the background is non-necessary, but an optional approach, I think, is a really good decision.
I agree with that statement. And I'm sitting here wondering, are we going to see are we going to see espionage empires crop up? Meaning, like, because this game would lend itself very well to player fantasies like the Tal Shiar, for example, like offshoot types that are strong into intel, that are, almost paramilitary things. Like, because we already have the rebellious faction thing as a thing in this game. We already have almost like Hutt-like empires, all your slaver style folks that are out there that could really benefit from bounty hunter intel when it comes to sabotaging and, making supply lines miserable. Again, player fantasy, this is kind of like, it feels like they're adding more and more whipped cream to the sundae or something. Like, it's way more finesse. getting sweeter all the time.
I do like the focus on this about being narrative rather than just being like effect.
Yes.
Because that is part of the problem with a lot of espionage systems in strategy games, where it is simply a hidden effect that you're applying to another player, and they won't find out about it until it's too late to react. Whereas here they're talking about, yeah, we'll help you build a story with this. And I forget the exact quote. I thought I had it here, but yeah, I did not actually pull it. But yeah, it is a really cool thing where it's like this is focused around getting the player to create their own story as they're going forward. And of course, the actual text is going to be scripted. That's sort of the way this stuff works across the board with Stellaris. But no, I love that, where the primary focus is the narrative for the player. And then, of course, in multiplayer, everything gets clicked through.
Right. Well, that's true. That's true. I this was unintentional, but I feel like we accidentally set up ammunition for why a dungeon master mode would be like a great addition to this game, because it is already so story driven. It's more than just I'm going to go comp stomp. You are literally building an empire that is yours and will. We're playing a game that has the ability for you to actually input a biography for your like leader and your nation and all that stuff in the character creation screen. So I don't know. It's the stories. I tweak the launch settings for the game so excessively because with all the mods we play, with all this stuff, we have relative boundaries of what we know will make the game fun. What we know is going to be too overpowering and just going to steamroll us and make everyone sad. Yeah. I want more control, always better, and I adore that this is going to be a narrative one, because when they call out those progress bars, Stark, I think that starts to nail further what I had said about just feeling bored with other spying systems.
Yeah.
They just are so forgettable, if you will. Forgettable or painful, and that's not good. So narrative-driven, you are right, in multiplayer, I do click through a lot of those, but not all of them. There are definitely times I read them, and you know, I'm going to take 1 minute here to draw a line in the sand, because I think this is worth saying, especially because we're going to talk about Become the Crisis. Crises are the exception. When something goes weird in a multiplayer game, like a bad guy has been announced, they're on the scene, they're all fussy about something, and they need their nap. That's when we start to joke and talk and say, uh-oh, you know, so-and-so's up there, and maybe we laugh about it because it's a fallen empire who's really fallen behind and we've lapped them and we're just going to kick their butts. Or some of these modded crises are really make you cry. And that leads to this conversation about adding in the Become the Crisis, because we're taking it all and we're amping it up, not only letting the player become the crisis optionally, but if the AI is going to sometimes pick up that mantle, that could lead to some hilarity where you've got someone who you thought was your friend over there who is now deciding, I am going to be the crisis and obliterate reality, which I'm all for.
Yeah, what did we find? That it was the AI could pick Become the Crisis,
they can
but it
pick
was less likely to do so if there was already a crisis unfolding, I think it was.
I believe that is very close to that text. And then I imagine on top of that, there's probably further modifiers that, like, your peaceful traders won't do it, I imagine. But then again, you know, one of Civ's most iconic things was that Gandhi loved to nuke people. And I would not mind if, like, some free traders were very keen on going from, like, peace, love, and capitalism to now we have to erase the universe because of everyone else. That would just be funny. I'm sorry, ruining other people's fantasy.
No, it's valid, though. It's like, yeah, it's valid. It's like, oh, yeah, no, we don't have to worry about them. And then it's like they come back for you.
It could happen by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Modders also get that out there, too, if you haven't already. Like, let's get us a little, like, a thing that can make it more likely for them. We'll need that.
There was an interesting comment here. Yeah. This is sort of tying into something we didn't discuss earlier, the intrinsic versus extrinsic. But originally, when they're talking about Become the Crisis, they were talking about having multiple forms for it, such as becoming a marauder, where you're just sort of trying to conquer, or becoming an espionage-focused crisis. Mm-hmm. You know, I think the phrase was striking from the shadows, or praise in from the shadows. Yeah. I do kind of hope some of that will be revisited in the future, because either by Paradox or by the modders, because some of that stuff sounds really cool.
I wanted
Go ahead.
double down on that statement. So yeah, the quote reads, we originally had ideas for the Become the Crisis feature to come in multiple shapes. So ranging from that destructive force like an endgame crisis to a subjugating force like a marauder, or manipulative force that preys in the shadows. Due to time constraints made that cut. So they made a choice of either making one fantasy stronger and more engaging or having multiple versions that felt more watered down. I don't mean to speak too soon, and I'm obsessed with this update, but I do feel, I hope this is constructive feedback, I'm not seeing the strong player fantasy in the current crisis that exists, and I want to point that out now because I'm not sad, mad, or upset about this expansion. I do not think it's a flop. It sounds to me like an A+, regardless of that. But we have said before that we fear that the crisis may be extremely forgettable, that it might be in its current iteration a one-time niche thing that gets tossed to the side. I do fear that if the crisis's only end goal is to obliterate the universe, that isn't my play style, so I don't know when I would do it. And I think that does make a lot of dev time go into the novelty category instead of the functional one. And I don't want it to be that way. For their sake, for my sake, for all of our sake.
At the same time, if it gives you the resources to actually pursue your intended goal, would that still be something you'd be like, okay, I'll just discard this now? Like, if you're not going to go all the way to obliterating stars, you're just going to snuff out a few stars to get the resources you need to conquer the galaxy. What do you think about that?
I think that's a very good question, and I think that it prevents me from putting the cart in front of the horse as much. Not that I really want to do that anyway for folks. I'm not trying to be scary. But I guess the answer to that would be I need to see more side by side what the perks are to it and what the trade-offs are. Because I think that the Becoming the Crisis thing, as I understand it, I could be wrong, but I feel like it's very flavored, and I'm worried that I'm not in love with the flavor. I feel like the question or the counter question I have to yours is, what if I just try something new on the menu that tastes better? Like, if I like the Imperium better, then that's when I would throw the Crisis to the curb. Now, but again, this is all for me to say I'm not mad about the Crisis system. I do think that having different routes of play style would make it more appetizing in the long run. So if this is Crisis Part 1 to a later Part 2, just like we had with Federation and now Nemesis, I'm happy, very, very happy with this. But I think it could be taken further. And you and I were just talking today about how there's ways that the Juggernaut itself could be taken much further for a whole other episode.
Yeah. I think we're gonna have to stick that one in its own episode at some point.
That's a huge other thing. But so I need to see it is the ultimate answer for me. Now, how do you feel about that? Like, how would you answer your own question there about, like, is the Crisis option appetizing enough for you to go that route versus doing something different, even if you only want to go halfway?
Yeah, it's gonna be the same situation where it's like I have to see what the bonuses I get along the way are. Okay, so admittedly, like, saying this is going to be sort of disposable content, and I can see myself doing it once and then setting aside. I can also see it being the situation where it's like, oh, hey, I can just deploy the Star Eaters and then run them around the galaxy. Like, there are other strategy games where I have definitely fallen in the trap of, oh, hey, here's an easy win route. I'm going to chase that repeatedly with flex. So yeah, it'll depend. It'll depend on exactly how it plays. It'll also depend on the thing I've got my eye on still are the mass Corvette and destroyer fleets.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately.
Yeah, that's one of the things that catches my eye, where it's like, even if my goal isn't to obliterate the galaxy, I might start going down this route just to start grabbing everybody, like just spam out huge fleets of ships. So we'll see. You brought up such a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because I think it added so much to the conversation. Really noting, like, what is your goal? Because my friends and I never complete a game of Stellaris. Like, we never make it to the victory year. For whatever reason, we either get bored with a match or we just... The thing is, more than boredom, we're just so excited to re-roll and re-explore an empire and re-explore space. So that is a really good question, because I'm immediately turned off by the idea of destroying the galaxy.
However, you're very right that, okay, I'm not happy with the 100% mark. But what if I'm extremely attracted to the thing that's at the 95% mark, which could be like, the Star Eaters or whatever we're talking about. It's the asteroid cruisers or if those appeal.
Cruisers.
Yeah, I have the list. I pulled it up here on the side as we were talking because I was trying to see if there are any negatives. Without belaboring the point too much, one thing that would scare me about it, and I can't remember if we talked about it in this episode, or the last one, but things like the devouring swarm in the game. When you choose the Civic to be a hive mind that is all about rapid expansion, you lose the diplomatic component to the game. You can't interact with the council or anything like that, the community. Can't talk to your neighbors. No one will have anything to do with you. If getting further in the crisis has diplomatic penalties, which I have to imagine it does, again, I believe it. I can't see it in a picture here. I'm on the official post 199, and it could absolutely be in another one. But it is my understanding as well. Yes, I feel like it's going to hurt that, to your point. It's probably somewhere that we read. So it's me trying to juggle a lot of things, and I'm not certain about their weight or shape yet. So it's hard to keep them in the air. I don't know where I'm going to land on it, but I will say I'm happy with the crisis system. I think they'll get a lot more longevity out of it, though, if they give us different route.
And I think even if they don't, I would be seriously shocked if we don't see a lot of expansion on that simply on the mod front.
100%.
Like, I know I'm usually not a proponent of mods for Stellaris, but I really suspect that we're going to see a lot of variety coming in with the crisis system from that. Because I think there was I'm almost certain I've read that in a previous dev diary. This was designed to be very modular and to be able to swap components out. The first contact chain was a little bit dicier because that was sort of all locked together into a single event chain, so you need to swap out pieces. But the part of the design of become the crisis system and the Empire and Custodian were specifically set up so that you could tweak pieces of them without affecting the whole system.
Right.
So I would be absolutely shocked if we don't see a lot of expansion of this in the modding community.
Fingers crossed, and not to plunder our pockets, but I will say that it wouldn't be the worst idea for some other kind of mini expansion thing sort of deal that fills in a different, bunch of different types. Although that one does kind of get on the lines of like, is this just, selling different? I don't know.
Well, no, that's also one of those hard decisions where it's like, so if you just had a thing where it's like, okay, here's 3 more Crisis playthrough modes as a DLC. Oh, no, I would too, but it would require owning this expansion.
Yes.
So that becomes like, when you're modding, when you're releasing a DLC that requires a previous DLC.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. And I don't, maybe somewhere down the line, but unless the crisis system gets moved to base game, I really don't see that happening.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years from now, if crisis gets moved to base game, then I could absolutely see it then. But right now,
you know what though?
That's it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you continue.
Something they have done in the past. If you've got, because there are things that are attached to future DLCs that are tied back, I could see something like a race pack in the future or another faction pack in the future, like something else that also includes an additional crisis pack. Because now I'm thinking about it, we have seen that. We saw that last year with with Federations, where the Origin system included stuff that required multiple DLCs. Like it required Utopia and required Lithoids, or I think that was a combo, or it required specific combinations in order to be available. So that could be a thing where it's like, oh, hey, if you've got Nemesis and you also have this pack here, then you get additional stuff. But I could see that.
Literally noob question because I didn't join in time. Was the Galactic Community added for free then? That space game sort of...
I think it was free. It was either added free that, it was... I think it was Federation. Yeah.
Because that's one of the ones, Stark, that hits at this weird spot. And I just wasn't here for it. Because Galactic Community coming with the Federation update or with the expansion, either way, I'm presuming it was free. But now that's being built upon in the Nemesis stuff, which I guess that's considered, well, the Imperium's part of the actual Nemesis update, though, right? Or is it part of the update of the pack? Now I'm getting confused.
It's part of the DLC.
So it's, yeah, right. So that's part of the paid.
Yeah, part of the DLC. Yeah, so they're paywalled.
So is the Galactic community free?
Yes.
Okay.
So
that helps.
My hesitation there was on the release date, because when you asked that initially, I'm sitting here going, was the community added with Federation, or was it added slightly before that? Because that was the only thing I was fuzzy on. I couldn't remember.
Well, I confirmed on the side here. I also found a fun quote. So according to the Stellaris wiki, it says, join the Galactic Federation and pass resolutions by voting with the rest of the community to make the galaxy a better place for everyone, or slowly build up your diplomatic weight and become the Senate, which is just funny because that was what it was billed as. That is not what we got, but it is what we're getting, and I'm so excited. But that's an interesting one, right? Like that even structure of the comment did not achieve the goal. And that means something to me. It also means something even more important, that is that they were willing to go back and finesse it further.
Yeah, they have been pretty good about that. And we talked about the thing with the Juggernaut where that's getting revised now also. So it's not once it hits the game, it's locked in stone and never touched again. They have done stuff in the past to try to help earlier releases.
Right.
And there have been a few elements that were pushed from paywalled to part of the base game further down the line. I think one of them was Ascension perks. This is one that actually goes back before I was playing.
Okay.
But originally, Ascension perks were Utopia only, and I believe those are base game now. There are still ones that are gated, but I think the Ascension perk system is now base game.
I have so much fun doing these episodes. Stark, we're about out of time on this one, and we have big conversations to save for the future. We have a big one in here about implicit versus explicit decision-making for game design. We have to table that one. That's going to be a good one. That was what we were going to talk about the Blorg about earlier, kind of making little things in there. We also wanted to talk, they had a comment in here. I think we can fit this in like a 2-minute spiel. But the Custodian Galactic Imperium, there's a quote, with the risk of sounding like a broken record, I wanted to highlight how much I enjoy the cycle of electing a custodian to fight a crisis, and then for the custodian to take power and become a new diplomatic crisis. It's very thematic, and it's a fantasy that we're very aware of from popular culture, and to some degree, history.
Yes.
Yeah, you pulled this out. Why is that, Star?
This I freaking love. Yeah. So, yeah, pulling from pop culture is great. I love it. It's also not surprising given Daniel Morgard is, like, his previous credits have been on the other Paradox Grand Strategy games, but I love the awareness of history with this game. Like, looking at political structure in the game and how some of this stuff plays out, a lot of it is informed by the way actual conflicts have played out, and I love that. Including this, like, we've got a situation here where it's like the custodian to imperium structure. Like, you can look at this as the Roman Empire, like the transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. And I think one of the achievements, Steam achievements, is even modern day Cincinnatus, specifically for stepping down after the crisis. You get an achievement for that, which is back. So, like, I love that. I love all of that about this. And I think that's part of what makes this game really special, is it's going beyond just, it would be one thing to just go through and say, okay, well, this is coming from this pop culture source, this is coming from this one. There's certainly a wealth of material, but there's also a certain historical awareness that I really do love about this.
That is indeed a very good point to call out. And again, like you said with the credits, there's a lot of experience and association with the historical games within the company. So it's very, very cool to see it come to this. Like you said, there's a lot of pop culture you can borrow from, but it pulling in the history is just extra special. So glad they're doing it. I have no doubt in my mind this is going to be just amplify the game fun so much more. I have been playing Stellaris like a madman again. I've been sinking a bunch of hours into it with friends. We actually took a break last night because we've been spending too much time in there. We've been playing through, but we're hitting that phase where it's like right now we know, we can sense there's something new on the horizon, so nothing we have is super engaging with us. right now. Absolutely loving it. If you have not already joined up, we know the Gilded server is brand new. So please take a moment, get in there. It's gilded.gg/RPN for Revelator Podcast Network. So gilded.gg/RPN. They have a great mobile app. It functions just like Discord on your desktop. It looks almost identical to Discord because it is a true Discord clone, but it's like Discord on steroids. You got way more functionality and features, and I love it. I really want to start playing some games in there with more Stellaris friends, people we know from the podcast. We definitely have people that are in there that are newer players. We have advanced players, and we've been playing quite often and hanging out in that chat. So don't be a stranger. Get involved with that. We do, Stark, have another 5-star shout out for this episode. Nice. Let's see here. Red Fox went over to iTunes or the Apple App Store thingy. App. I don't know how to use words today. They said, hey guys, I love the quality and format of the show. Currently play on console at the moment. Hoping the 3.0 changes apply there as well. That's such a great question statement sort of thing, Fox. First of all, thank you for the 5 stars. We will gladly shout out 5-star reviews on the show. I would love to keep doing that. Fox, join us in Gilded. Chat with us. I have an answer sort of to that. And that is to say that they have been catching up at light speed with the console updates. Do we have a firm answer though, Stark? We don't know for sure. PC only?
No, I don't. I think there's elements coming over. Okay, so this is, I might be talking out of order here, but I could be wrong. I think the console is going to 2.8 or something like that. But it's, yeah, I think that's what it is. But I haven't kept a close eye on the console update cycle. So they've been doing a good job about getting it up to speed. And I think they said specifically they want to get the console versions into parity with the PC version, but they're not there just yet. So
yes,
3.0,
right.
3.0 is definitely going to end up on the consoles. It's just probably not going to be there in a week and a half.
I believe you were totally on the money with that. I have a very strong memory about them saying they wanted, probably at the Paradox Insider event, saying they wanted to bring them in sync with one another. And if that was at that event, I imagine that it was them saying they wanted to do it not too far flung into the future either, if I am getting that correct. Now, a lot of the blog articles and stuff I'm skimming are saying you're going to have to wait a bit. Let's see. In addition to the paid Lithoid pack, Stellaris Console Edition will receive both the Galactic Community and the archaeological sites featured in Update 2.6. Well, that's a bit of a helping hand. So if they're at 2.6 and the game's been at 2.7 for a while, we haven't been at 2.8. It did not go 2.89, 3.0.
Yeah, no, there was a full number iteration.
Red, we're getting the answer. I'm doing it right now. I'm digging it up.
I would need to actually look at the release cycle on the consoles because from memory, I think the archaeology pack was further back than Lithoids. And then of course that's coming in around Federations.
Were we on 2.0?
Yeah, maybe that's all the sequence. So that's about a year. That's about a year and a half behind PC. So
I thought we were on 2.0.
What?
I really thought we were on 2.7, but apparently we're on 2.8, says the wiki, which I don't doubt that. That's probably what we moved to with the
with Federations.
What's their fate? Yeah, I guess that's it, huh? So yeah, okay, yeah, it says Federations there. I thought with Necroids,
behind. Yeah,
it's only 2. Yeah, that's not bad, and we'll be at So yeah, that's very close then.
So at least a couple of months behind. You're probably gonna be about a year behind, unfortunately. Like I'd like to think probably later in this year you might actually finally catch up to PC. Like it depends on how fast this goes through, and I obviously don't have any inside information on console development. But they like they've said, they have a priority on getting console caught up. So
yeah,
cross your fingers.
That's right. Cross your fingers. I don't remember if anyone knows for certain the date that we may or may not have completely made up. I'm continuing to kind of skim things. People are saying consoles are catching up fast. Maybe this was it.
The date. I'm just guessing, just based on how fast they've been progressing through the PC release cycle. Consoles, I'm guessing sometime later this year.
I think so too.
That's not inside information. That's just I'm guessing. I'm taking the numbers I've got and going maybe.
And because we kind of strongly understand the intentionality behind that, which is when they catch up, life will be easier in the sense that they won't be mixed messaging stuff. It will be a lot more parity, I think is what you said earlier. Like it will just be...
It just makes life easier. Like from the back end, like it just makes life easier for devs because it's like if you're working on the same content for all platforms at once, then you can just focus on that. You don't have to worry about, okay, well, we're going to do this for this, but these guys are working on that. Yeah. That team over there is, what are they doing? Why are they eating glue?
Stop it! So
yeah, it's definitely it helps if you've got everybody on the same page.
Indeed. Well, that kind of brings us to the very end of this. Like I said, please feel free to get involved. We got the volunteer segment up on the site. If you'd like to help me keep the network going, you can become a member up there. RevelatorNetwork.com/subscribe has the ways. We're looking at buffing that out. I guess I'll give a very brief teaser because it's only a teaser. There's nothing finalized. But I am in talks with a company who does like private RSS feed stuff. So like private, you could add in bonus episodes and ad-free experiences. And then they also have a cool program for kind of helping people refer friends to the show where they can get like meaningful rewards for it. So like you could get yourself free access to an RSS feed, for example, if you share the show with a couple friends. I really like what they were talking about. I had sought them out. So we're in the talks as a network about that sort of stuff. But it could really help this show. If you're interested in it, again, drop a line, become a member. That stuff helps out a ton. And I'm looking at beefing it all out. So people are beefing it up, expanding it out, getting everyone what they want, get into your systems how you want them. If you have something that you really like out of podcast memberships, I'm also interested to hear that as well. Like I said, get in the Gilded where we chat, check out the blog. Oh, the last episode and this one will have show notes formally, like they're actually on the blog. So if you want that, they exist. They are basically copy paste sort of stuff that we got from their notes, but it is up there with all the links and all the things you need. That's RevelatorNetwork.com as well. I think that's kind of everything. Stark, we got our socials, we got our Twitters. Those are listed down below. How to Fight Right. You guys got some new posts up on your website?
Yep, just had one go up yesterday, so I gotta, as soon as I'm done here, I gotta turn around and start writing tomorrow's.
Oh my! Well, even more reason to close us out. So check us out. Grab the Twitters below. Go over to How to Fight Right. Get involved with the podcast. However you are most interested, leave that 5-star review so we can shout you out on the show. Big thank you all for listening. Thank you for supporting. And thank you for sharing our excitement for Stellaris because it's really, really ramping up here. And I cannot wait. As we're recording this, it is April 6th, which puts us, under 10 days, Stark. Under 10 days.
Yep.
It's coming. It's coming. We'll get... I'm going to do this last second. I'm going to drag it out for an extra minute here and say, very tentative on the next episode. We could meet next week on the 13th to record one. However, because we do have a good conversation to finish with the implicit thing and the implicit explicit. I wouldn't mind even if that wound up being just a 15-minute topic. We have that one. So if you are game for it, we could maybe meet next week and try and do a recording. Otherwise, the next obvious one will be to do a post-Nemesis episode.
I think we can do one next week.
Okay, folks, and look out for that. We'll put that on the calendar. Expect that in your ear holes. Like I said, get involved, get subscribed, and we will catch you then. Stay safe. Thanks, Stark, for your time. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Take care.